So this book is The 13 Days of Christmas, written by Jenny Overton, illustrated by Shirley Hughes. And I was in the bookstore last year, and there's two women in there that know all the books and love books, and they're crazy about books, and so they both told me that this was one of their favorite books, but that you have to read it the way that it is by the day. So it's 13 Days of Christmas, and the first one is today, the 6th of December, and then the next time you get to read the book is on the 24th, Christmas Eve. So I'm going to start with the first chapter, called St. Nicholas's Day. When Prudence Kitson asked her father what he would like for Christmas, he sighed and said, "A husband for your sister." Her brothers James and Christopher agreed with him. Their elder sister, an apple, had looked after the family ever since Mama had died. She was charming and pretty and well-meaning, but she was also a very bad cook. She forgot the pie in the oven or the stew on the fire so often that the dinner was burnt 5 days out of 7. Sometimes she even forgot what she was making and put sugar in the meat pasties, or stewed the pears in vinegar, or tied the cake mixture in a cloth and boiled it over the fire. But although she was hopelessly vague in the kitchen, she was very brisk everywhere else, much too brisk for the family's comfort. "James, have you made your bed? Prue, have you mended your hem? Christopher, your hair needs cutting. Papa, give me your coat. I must let out the buttons. You're beginning to put on weight." "I do wish you'd get married," Christopher said crossly, stamping into the parlor after an apple, and that's Annaple, never seen that name before, had sat him in the kitchen chair and pruned his fringe until his forehead felt cold. "She's pretty enough, isn't she? She's as pretty as the Burney girl who got married last week." "Francis wants to marry her, so he says." James looked up from the model ship he was making. "He says that if she marries him, she'll never have to cook a meal again. He's got enough money to pay for a cook and a housekeeper and probably half a dozen serving maids as well." There is a picture. "I know, and she says she likes him." "Well, why won't she marry him then?" Prudence said. "She thinks he isn't romantic enough. Too unimaginative, she says. Too solemn." "Romantic," Christopher said scornfully. And Apple's fanciful ways were a great nuisance to her family. She bought a harp and sat on the windowsill twanging it, singing in a small flat voice and breaking her fingernails on the gilded strings. She sighed over pear blossom in the spring, ate strawberries even though they brought her out in a rash, cooed over babies, fussed about wearing gloves to church, and wasted time embroidering flowers on a useless strip of ivory silk which had taken her 3 years already. She plaited her hair like a goose girl's, stuck wilting daisies in it, and talked about the simple pleasures of country life, although she had never so much as milked a cow, making butter in the dairy, picking lavender, herding the geese across the fields, feeding lambs, long evening by the fire with your patchwork. "Perhaps if Francis bought a farm," Christopher began, remembering this. "I don't believe that would help at all," Prudence said. "There's too much work and mud and compost on a real farm." "He ought to do something, well, fanciful," James agreed, "like sending her an armful of pear blossom, or buying a flute and coming to sing under her window one night." The doorbell rang, and Christopher leant out of the window to see who it was. "It is Francis." "Run down and let him in, Kit," Prudence said. "But it's Nan he's come to see." "I know, but perhaps we could give him some advice. After all, we do know what Nan is like." "Only too well," Christopher said bitterly. "I suppose he really does want to marry her?" "He says he does," Prudence said. Christopher clattered downstairs and in a few minutes reappeared with Francis Vere. Here he is in a picture. Definitely an older time than our present, by the clothing. Who had brought flowers for an apple, as he did on every possible occasion, and pokes of sweets for the children. He began to talk about an apple almost at once. "She's so sweet-tempered, not like Clarissa Verney." "She can be very finicky, you know," James said cautiously. I mean, you're really quite sure you want to marry her?" Christopher glared at him, thinking they shouldn't give Francis any let-out. But Francis said yes, he was quite sure. "Where is she?" he asked, looking hopefully toward the door. "In the kitchen, throwing together a horrible St. Nicholas Day cake. Listen, there's nothing we'd like more than to see Annaple get married." get married to you, Prudence put in tactfully. To you. So we thought perhaps we could give you some advice. Advice? Help. Prudence looked at him, thinking of burnt beef and sagging cake and apples and caramel as hard as cannonballs. She said cautiously, you really can afford a cook, can't you? A dozen cooks, if she likes. Well, actually, it's you I was thinking of. I mean, an apple never eats much. She thinks thin girls are more romantic. So it doesn't matter to her if things are all burnt up, but you don't want to starve. If Annapple marries me, she need never even lift a spoon again. I'll give her anything she likes, Frances said earnestly. Anything at all? Christopher asked, wanting to get it straight. Suppose she wanted a drum of her own, or a sword, or a trumpet, or a horse. Anything. Including a piper? James asked. Frances was startled. Why a piper? Because once she read a tale about Scotland, misty mountains and seals singing and the dew on the heather. That was when she took to calling herself an apple, all Scottish instead of Annabel. And before that it was Anick, Christopher put in, because of French things being more romantic, and then English. And for a bit before that it was Nancy. Could you get used to leaving, say, Nancy at breakfast and coming home to find Annette at supper? She was christened plain Anne, but it isn't fanciful enough for her. And, James said patiently, the girl in this tale, the Scottish tale, I mean, used to be woken at dawn by a piper playing a lament under her window. An apple fancied that. She may go on about the sunrise and the dew and the dawn chorus, Christopher said, but I notice she stays in bed till past 8 o'clock. Prudence said, poor Francis. Won't want to hire a piper, not if he marries an apple. He'd get woken up too. But Francis said he would provide a dozen pipers if Annapple wished. Only not the mountains, of course. Not unless we move to Scotland or the Welsh border or somewhere in the North Country. That's a good idea, Christopher said, feeling that even if by some miracle Annapple agreed to marry Francis, she might quite easily take time off to walk round to Lee Street each day and check on the family. If Annapple marries me, Francis said firmly, she can have an army of pipers and a rockery full of heather plants, a row full of silk dresses, flowers for her hair, a gold ring for her finger. 5 gold rings, Christopher said, because both of Papa's brothers are clergymen, and so are 3 of Mama's, and they'd all want to be the one that did the marrying. 5 gold rings, Francis said obediently. Why doesn't Annapple want to marry me? There was a pause. Christopher said, it's a pity you're not a woodcutter or something like that. She goes on forever about life in the greenwood. Partridges for pets, you know, a handful of herbs for dinner, the sky for a roof, herding geese through the dewy grass, all that nonsense. Or if you were the 7th son of a 7th son, James said. Annapple's nutty about fairy tales. Or a soldier, perhaps. Haven't you ever heard her babbling about how romantic it would be to marry a soldier and follow the drum? She's been going on about that ever since Papa took us to watch the summer review in St. Stephen's Fields. She does like you, truly, Prudence said, very much, only perhaps she'd like you a bit more if you were, well, more light-hearted, imaginative. Yes, look, are you going to give Annapple a Christmas present? James asked. Of course, anything she wants. Well, couldn't you give her something imaginative, original? Anything. What would she like, do you think? Prudence asked her brothers. A trumpet? Christopher said hopefully. If you can't be sensible, Kit. What about a spinning wheel, Jim said. That's very fairy tale-ish. She said her favorite story was that one with the idiotic girl who couldn't guess Rumpelstiltskin's name. It wasn't, Christopher said. You're getting muddled. It was the one with the princess who had to make shirts out of nettles to bewitch her brothers back from being swans. Well, whichever one it was, Prudence said, don't you think a spinning wheel would be a nuisance? She'd be forever breaking the thread or pricking herself. That wretched embroidery's bad enough, and even if she did manage to spin some thread, we'd have to spend hours winding it. And then she'd knit scratchy stockings for us to wear. Don't you think a musical box would be better? I don't know, Prue. We'd have trouble enough with that screeching harp. Perhaps something French. A cookery book, Christopher said bitterly. A cookery book, an outsized egg timer, and an alarm clock. Francis was thinking. Yes, I see, he said. Yes, I do see. A change from flowers. Yes, all right, I'll think something up. When Francis left, Prudence walked with him down Lee Street to the marketplace. It was choir practice night and the church door was open. Listen, Prudence said suddenly. I thought, yes it is, it's the opening bit of the Advent carol. Frances and she stood in the doorway to listen. The pipes and fiddles were playing the introduction. A boy's solitary voice lifted in the Advent carol for the coming of Christmas. Sorry, I don't know the tune here. Sheep like stones in silent fold, snow like ash settling cold. Walk a world bereft as dream, birdless wood, standing stream. Bethlehem, the children whine, travelers wait in line. Tired men ring the courtyard fire, tethered mules crowd the byre. Stumble through the cattle pens, overhead roosting hens. Spread with bales the reeking floor, birthing bed, sacks and straw. Trim the lamp, bemused and numb, watch and wait, soon a sun. Prudence said, I wonder if Nan's remembered to order the Christmas candle. Frances wasn't listening. Something imaginative, he said. Something original. I must think this over. Well, don't take too long, Prudence said. It will be Christmas in no time at all now. I can never really believe it till I hear them singing the Waiting Carol. And that's the end of chapter 1, and we have to wait till Christmas Eve to read the next chapter. So see you then. Bye. Night, night.